Hello and welcome, everyone, to Second Person and You. We're going to have some fun today talking about one of the least written perspectives in writing. Everyone's very familiar with first person perspective, which is I or me. Third person perspective being the he, she, they, where you're following a character that you've created. But today we're going to talk about second person, something that is near and dear to my heart and a lot of fun. Let's get started. So no sense in talking about a panel without talking about a little bit of accreditations. Who the heck is this nerd? My name's Flutter Priest. Currently, as per stats, I'm the 33rd most followed on fanfiction, interviewer, co-host of the Barcast podcast, in which we interview various fandom celebrities and talk about, in addition, when we have fanfiction writers on, we talk about their writing styles, ask them writing questions. You can check us out on fanfiction there. I was a previous writing coordinator for Generals on /MLP, previous writer for Pony ASMR project. I've got 3 physical publications under my real name, which I won't tell you about, but I do have 2 nonprofit books for my stories that are found on Lulu. And I also made this list of accreditations that I've done, and it was really hard, and I've done panels at a few different places. Here on the screen, I've got a picture of me doing a panel at BronyCon 2013, and I was asked a very safe for work question that I'm sure is too lewd for this convention. So let's talk about you a little bit. I know that when we use you-like statements, people will like to think that I'm talking about you specifically, the person listening to this panel. And the problem with this panel is we're going to be using the word you a lot. There's going to be yous where I'm talking about you collectively, as in you, the people paying attention to the panel, and you being the reader of the story that's being written. That's going to get confusing. So just to read what I've written here, this panel will be using the word you quite a lot. This does not mean that you should interpret the word you to mean instructions that on what you, the person reading this, should do. This is, however, not relevant when you, the listener, are being given advice on how to write you in second person. In this case, you refers to the collective usage of the word you and not the direct use of you, referring to the person listening to me right now with sentient consciousness. In this way, you will write second person applies to you. When I say that you don't know if you is even a word anymore, then you should consider that to be the collective you and not you directly. I'm sure you understand. I have great news for you. It's definitely going to get a lot more complicated. So for fun, let's grab our water, hydrate, wash your hands, and let's have a sip of water every time I say the word you. Also, let's talk about yous for a second. A quick disclaimer about yous for you. Not to be confused with you or you, we will certainly not be talking about yous, although I wanted to ensure that I gave yous their proper dues. While I don't have any pictures of yous and shoes, I wanted to make sure that yous and shoes do not make good yous for second person. So I go as far as to say that yous as yous and shoes are lose-lose for stories. On top of that, stories about yous as yous and shoes for crews are easy to refuse when it comes to stories. So please stay away from yous. What is second person perspective? The most common types of writing that you're ever going to find are first person perspective and third person perspective. For instance, reading Harry Potter, you're going to have the third person perspective of writing. Harry is a character within the story. We follow Harry directly throughout the story. First person perspective is different. That's when you're going to be falling more towards Twilight or Hunger Games, in which the main character is the actual person telling you the story. It is as if you are in their head. You are understanding what is happening as it is being written. So, second person finds itself in the very center. Second person point of view belongs to the person or people being addressed. In this case, the person in the story is you. I will say you are at this panel listening to me speak to you in completely nonsensical ways. The biggest indicator of second person is the use of the second person pronouns you, your, yourself, yourselves as the main way of addressing the main character. The narrator may be addressing the audience directly, but more often the second person reference in this is a character within the story. That gets really complicated when you begin to dissect it. But the good news is I am your trusty guide. Welcome to the internet. We're going to break this down in a way that's easy to understand. Why in the world would you want to write in second person perspective? The good news is that it's grown really rapidly. Whether you're doing things such as Dungeons and Dragons or seeing memes online, the example that I have here is green text, which has grown not only on various sites such as 4chan, but also reposts over on Reddit, telling second-person stories to make you fit into someone else's shoes. Here's a small example by some person I've never heard of before. Wake up in Equestria. You go to Unicorn Twilight's House of Dead Trees inside a tree. First day on the new job is Equestria working for a cute purple book horse. Score. Hey, she says to you, would you stamp the checked-in date on all these books that were just returned? Sure, you say, shutting your trap before "marry me" escapes your lips. You pick up a book, instant paper cut. You fling it across the room with the fury of 1,000 suns. Twilight stares at you. Sorry, book allergy, and you walk out in shame. Rip. It's a good little laugh. Maybe not necessarily the most integrated story. You're not going to be walking away from it feeling like you just had your life rocked by background pony, but it's an example, a small example of second-person perspective. Second-person perspective stories originally began in book form in the form of lifestyle guides. For instance, back as far as the 1700s, you can see different books that say, you will go to the store and pick up these things. You will go to the market and do this. You will perform these rituals in order to claim certain deities. Just as like instructions and lifestyle guides, they've been going for forever. But it evolved into fiction over time through thought exercises as a way to put yourself into someone else's shoes. Another way to really think about that is Dungeons and Dragons, where you're telling someone you are in a dungeon, and before you is a Gru. Do you cast magic missile at the darkness? And as in addition, probably what most people watching this panel are very aware of are choose your own adventure novels, which gained a lot of notoriety in the 80s and 90s. Just being able to have this way that you could flip through a book that it felt like you had the direct choices in order to interact with the story, and in that way make it yours. It became a really, really unique way to address physical media, and it still has a large impact this day. I will address it when we get closer on, but there are other good examples, even in ponyfic, by someone like The Purloined Pony by Chris. Very worth checking out. So in that case, why would you want to start writing second person? Why should you do it? No one else, it's not a very well accepted genre. It's not what commonly gets published. Why should you attempt it? Well, let's break it down to 3 really easy steps. 1, challenging yourself to do something new and completely unconventional in writing is one of the best ways to gain new skills and to really test yourself. It really makes you try to use muscles that you've never exercised before. Think of it as going to the gym, like at all. Or for those that do go to the gym, trying a new exercise that maybe you've never really used before. You can find yourself stretching muscles that you've never known existed. This is another perfect way of doing that, but for your brain muscles. On fanfiction, this particular format of story is becoming more and more popular as various writers from the fandom are moving towards fanfiction as a legitimate writing resource and as a place to store anon pony stories or anon stories. Second person is becoming very, very popular, and not even just for anon and anon Philly. We'll get to more examples later on in the future. But on top of that, for me, I found that writing second person stories is just fun. You get this blank canvas of being able to do anything you want and being able to have the reader feel like they are directly in on the action and they're as a part of it. It feels like there's a better connection to the audience that you're actually speaking to. So let's talk about how a little bit. And this is where I get uncomfortable as a panelist. Let's be real honest. Let's break it down. Giving writing advice is a slippery slope, because when it comes to taking writing advice, there's multiple different levels that a writer can be on, and so that's why I want to start with rule zero. If you aren't having fun doing something, you don't have to do it. If you don't have fun writing second person stories, don't worry. It's not the end of the world. It shouldn't stop you from writing at all. But I mean, once you start adding in more rules, like if you're having fun, it doesn't matter what other people think. So sure, maybe your second person isn't the best thing in the world, but you tried something, and that's awesome. There's no rules for how to write something perfectly. Now, there are rules to writing something well, as many of the other panelists here will tell you today. And once you start understanding those rules, then it really lets you play with the medium. And thankfully, thanks to different movements in writing right now, such as unfiction, for those who are on track with that, we'll talk about that a little later too. We really have the opportunity in second person perspective to try things that have never been done before and to try and interact with our audiences in ways that we've never, ever encountered. More than just immersing someone into the world. Second person perspective can actually allow people to interact within their own worlds through being able to make physical choices that impact the medium. I've rambled enough about rules. Let's get to how we actually start writing. Second person perspective stories, on the whole, for beginners, can be broken into two different ways. The first way being writing a story that is on rails, where you, the reader, are a character from beginning to end. As in, you are not necessarily you. You can be you. You, in the story, can be the person who is holding the book in front of you, sitting in the chair, reading the story, and it is you, the person, with your same physical appearance, hairstyle, everything in that world. And then you, the author, the writer, have to take that person on a journey that you craft. You, the author, are tasked with helping the reader fit so snugly into their own shoes that they understand the way the story goes and what the decisions that they are making. The second way is choose your own adventure style. And this is the one that's probably the most fun, where you are you. You, the reader, are you, and you have full story agency, meaning that you get to decide how you go forward in the story. If you approach a fork in the path, you can decide as a reader to go left or right. Then you, as the author, are tasked to understand every choice that the reader is being presented and to write a case for every single choice. At that point, you are literally developing a game. You're developing a video game at that point. And it becomes more and more difficult to understand what exactly a reader is thinking. Whereas on Rails, you don't necessarily think about what the reader is thinking. You're more or less putting them on a journey, if that makes sense. One way to think about it is in Choose Your Own Adventure style, you are writing a maze. On rail style, you are writing a roller coaster. The people that get on the roller coaster or enter the maze have different ways of going about it. You'll never get off the roller coaster until the very end. Well, except it's a book. They can shut it off. Not the point. And with the maze, there's no escape. You're out until it's done. Well, except it's a book. You get the point. Let's talk about on rail style a little bit, because there's various pros and cons to tackling this for the very first time. One of the big pros being it, as far as actually getting words on paper, second person perspective fiction is significantly easier than its May's choose your own adventure style counterpart. In this way, you're able to just start writing a story, and the story is about you, the reader, and you're done. You don't have to think about all the different choices that people need to make. You have full control of the plot. You have a character that you are writing, and you, the writer, get to have someone put themselves into someone else's shoes and think about complex subjects or even humorous shenanigans in a way they may never would have considered before. There's difficulty there because the reader also loses a sense of choice and individuality. One of the big complaints about people reading second-person fiction, especially on fan fiction, is that they feel like you are not you. So the reader would then, at that point, not know or understand the decisions being placed in front of them. They feel like the character in the story, you, would never do what you, the person reading the story, would do in real life. And it's really difficult to understand how to flex those decisions for every single person reading a story. It comes down to the age-old tale of knowing your audience. You can know in general broad swaths about an audience, but where second-person perspective gets difficult is you have to know the individual person in the audience that you are targeting. And that's where it gets really difficult. But on that way, when you find this magical medium in the on-rails style, it's considered the more artistic option. Because if you can find universal truths that each person is, say, afraid of death, naturally they would make the decision that steers them away towards death. You can give an illusion of choice that makes the on-rails style work really well. The next way is the choose your own adventure style. And this is the one that I see a lot of people have fun with. And it's also the one that has the most projects that get set to the side. And we're going to talk about that a little more in the choose your own adventure cons. But one of the pros for it is choose your own adventure styles are highly customized to the reader. There's never that problem where the person feels like they don't have the choice and they don't really feel like themselves in the story. Being able to exercise options and choice development really leaves a positive imprint as long as they feel like the choices actually matter. And as far as you, as a writer, it really expands your critical thinking because every single time your people make a choice, you've now branched your story into two paths. On top of that, because you put so much work and effort into your story, it encourages multiple reads per reader. They may find, well, I got this ending, but what if I got the other ending? So you got people that are playing your story over and over again. And I know a lot of people get that sense of reward out of not just reading through a story once and saying that was really great, that was impactful, but coming back to it again and again and again. And if you're a reader or a writer that really likes that feeling, you may seriously want to consider writing a choose your own adventure, as it really makes people feel like they have something cool to look forward to, a game within a game within a game. There is a significant problem with this. And it's easier, honestly, to just show you. It's difficult to control what ending a reader will get. And it's really apparent when you have an intended ending that maybe you thought in your head, like a good ending. You can't control that they get that good ending all the time. Because let's say you have one good ending in mind. Well, it gets more difficult because, see, with this binary tree here, this implies that every choice that you put within your story has two possible outcomes. And the root of the story is where your story begins. Well, when they first make their first branching choice in your choose your own adventure, you are now writing two chapters for every one chapter that you've started from. And that gets really difficult really quick. So let's say this is a story that only has 3 choices. Well, you've now written 5 different endings for one story. On top of that, that's not including the 3 chapters that are resulted of the choices before and your initial chapter. To think about it even deeper, choices are also really popular in video games, and it's usually the easiest way to express this is how choices work. This is the choice diagram to a game called the Stanley Parable. And I think that's really useful to look at this and think of it in your own way as a choose your own adventure story. But you have to keep in mind for every choice that is within that game, and it's not that many, there are so many endings that have to be written and designed and coded in order to make their choose your own adventure game work. And so when you're writing a choose your own adventure game, it's really important that you start small with extremely basic choices. So for example, if you had a story where you as a character go and try to tackle, you're trying to go out and hang out with Luna as a main character. You have to make 1 or 2 choices, which is go upstairs, go downstairs, go to here and here. You have to keep in mind how many chapters of fiction you are actually going to be writing, because if you try to bite off too much way too quickly, it's an easy way to have your project fail. But that, I don't think that should be a reason to attempt not writing in second person. Second person can be a really rewarding experience, and it really allows you to interact with your audience in a way that is so unique to this perspective rather than in first person or in third person. There are common struggles with it that I see that writers and readers alike face when approaching second person fiction. And the first one that you're never ever going to get ahead of is some people just don't like it. They think that with second person perspective, that the writer's getting into their head. They're saying, you are going to do this. They feel manipulated. Writing second person feels gross, and it's just not for them. And you're never really going to be able to take care of that. There's a lot of really great second person fiction out there. But if someone just isn't interested in it, then you can't account for that. In the same way that I love comedy and horror stories, but I don't go out of my way to say read sci-fi. You're never going to necessarily take a sci-fi story, put it in front of me and say, this will change your mind, because you might not. But as for the ones that I have listed here, you, the reader, would never do this. That's a common problem with second person stories, especially for ones that are on rails, but it also happens for choose your own adventure style. If you're presented with a choice inside the fiction, or your character is faced with a dilemma where they say, well, I tell you what, I was mean to Fluttershy. I'm going to send her a gift basket. Well, the reader could look at this and go, send her a gift basket? What? No, I would just go apologize. This character is stupid. It's not me. This isn't me in the story. Story dropped. Done. And that's a big challenge. My suggestion that I would give for people facing this sort of struggle is, when you have a character that you're writing, really dive into the mental process of the character that you're writing. Really dive into what you would do. And maybe by breaking down and showing the pragmatism of the choices that the character is making, the reader will still be along for the ride. I've found that a lot of second person readers, if you give them enough justification to the choices that the character in the story is making, they will understand. And while it may not be their choice, they put themselves into someone else's shoes. And that is what it's worth. The other problem that we run into is there seems to be a bit of a stigma for second person perspective on film fiction, fan fiction, even in the general writing world. People don't generally consider second person a legitimate format. They think that, oh, it's cute, It's artistic, but it could never actually be published. Time and time again, this has been proven to be false. It is difficult. It's one of the most difficult writing challenges that you could ever take up. But it is so rewarding when you do it right that I can't not encourage people to attempt to tackle this, even just something for fun, even if it's not the best thing you've ever written, give it a shot. You may find it really exciting. Don't let a few people saying second person perspective is yucky, or it's not for me, or all the second person stories are the same. Don't let that stop you from attempting something new. And don't let that stop you from attempting something that you could turn out loving. The bigger problems usually come down to audience-based struggles within the fiction. And this is actually the hard writing problems that are inherent with second person. This implies a lot of decisions that every single author that writes second person is going to tackle differently. With you being a character in the story, you, the audience, having things like, oh, well, I recognize you from across the room, a character in your story says. Well, how did you recognize me? Well, it was by your brown hair. Well, now you've alienated every person with black hair, colored hair, blonde hair. Talking about appearance gets really difficult. So let's say we don't talk about what the character looks like. Let's say we completely throw that off the table. Let's say you are starting to get more friendly with a person, and you write a third person, a secondary character so well that you decide, you know what, I'm going to have you in the story pursue some sort of romantic option with this secondary character. Well, romance is a big problem for second person stories because you can't account on the preferences of the person reading. You can't account for the gender of the person that is reading the story. It becomes a know your audience facet. Do you know that you are writing for a male audience? Well, chances are you could be okay writing a female love interest. Are you writing for a female audience? You could be okay writing for a male romance interest. That said, that doesn't account for everyone. Who knows? Maybe you could be writing a story for males with a male interest, or a female story with a female interest. Just know that you're routing down your audience. You're routing down the people that could get enjoyment from your story, and that becomes really difficult. I think it's really important when you write second person to be aware of who the story is for. And if you're having fun, if you're writing for yourself, keep in mind that the person in the second person that you're writing for is you. That does not necessarily mean it's a self-insert. Not that you, the reader, and you, the writer, are the same person, but you're writing an experience where you're allowing people to get into your shoes to talk about the thing that you want to talk about. And it's so unique in second person that by putting someone into shoes of conflicts that you've dealt in real life that are complicated, you can write a second person that invites someone else to enter your shoes for a while in a way that is not a self-insert. And I realize it's really complicated, but it's a really exciting endeavor. With that in mind, taking a look, I want to talk a little bit about some suggestions of great stories and great people to check out for second person stories. There's several really great second person writers on fanfiction or fanfiction.net, and it's so difficult to make all of them feel included. Just to think a few off the top of my head that have written wonderful second person stories I didn't include on this list. Colden Gardez has some amazing second person stories. Category of Grant has amazing second person stories. Mad Max the Black. But some of the E and teen rated stories that I wanted to really highlight here are Birthday Present by Get Me Out of Here. Get Me Out of Here is a wonderful writer that originally started on /MLP writing green text, like the example that I showed earlier. and instead came to fan fiction to attempt second-person prose, and came out with this really wonderful Rainbow Dash story that I almost consider essential second-person reading. It's a really great way of how to tackle romance. It uses the on-rails style. Um, it's a really great example of someone who knows exactly what they're doing, knows the audience that they're targeting, and just goes for it rather than trying to accommodate the people that he knows wouldn't enjoy the story. Another great example of second person comedy that, in my opinion, works no matter what your gender is, no matter what your name is, no matter what your physical appearance is Cone of Shame by Anon Pencil. And before I have stuff thrown at me for the nepotism card, Cone of Shame is a really genuinely funny story that has Rainbow Dash in a position where she has a neck cone around her, just like a dog or just like a cat. And the setup has you, the reader, interacting with this character. And Rainbow Dash is all sorts of cute. I can't suggest it enough. It's really great. An example of a long-form romance that uses the choose your own adventure style is Even Kindness Needs Kindness by Crowley. Crowley is someone on FinFiction who isn't really active as much anymore, but the way that Crowley helped write a choose your own adventure in a way that was maintainable for him was that he allowed the people in the comments to actually say what they thought should happen next. And based on what would happen in the comments, Crowley would then write the next chapter, taking in the reader's thoughts and opinions on what should happen, and in that way, pay respect to you, the reader. It's really, really fantastic. He has a lot of great stories out there, including Drippy Hoops. Even Kindness Needs Kindness is a Fluttershy story. There's a lot of great stories by him, and I can't suggest them enough. And of course, who would be remiss to not include a non-pony story here? A non-pony is a unique facet in second person where you are a pony. So we are taking the human being that is reading this book and we are putting them in pony form in the pony world. Belly Rubs in Pony Prison is a really great. Oh my goodness, I got it confused for another story. I apologize. This takes place with Anon, and Anon is a featureless blank slate of a character that is very popular to be used on FinFiction. And it puts him in pony prison where he needs to punish the ponies by giving them belly rubs. It's a really great read and very entertaining. There's also this terrible writer out there by the name of Flutterpriest. He has some stories, he has some books, whatever, he's okay. He has a story called Dreamscape that's about you having a battle in a dream world, all Inception-like with Luna. It's all right with checking out. It's okay. With that, I actually took some time to try and shorten my presentation for Titanium Dragon prior to this. So to try and account for him, I'm actually at the question and answer portion of this panel. So I'm going to hopefully ask that we allow the questions to be open, so that way folks can ask questions. Yeah, I'm willing to take whatever sort of writing questions you have related to pony fiction, second person perspective, Anon, Pony Anon. I went through all this really quickly because this is my first time doing a panel alone. I want to hear from you guys. How's things going? How's your guys' con so far? I'm going to put a little thing here in the panel backstage. Putting a little open Q&A in our secret panelist chat. I'm going to check the writing stream audience. Oh my goodness, everyone loved the use thing that I had. I'm happy Trick Question caught my Baba is You reference. I had little references all throughout this. I didn't quite have a stream script, but I tell you what, it was It was really fun to write this. Hopefully you guys got as much enjoyment as I do. Several people are typing. That's exciting. Hey there, Non-Pencil. Thank you for joining. Con is great so far. How about you? Thanks for all the advice. I'm really enjoying PonyFest. I really got to give hats off to Zephyr, the head of the writing track, Dexanth, Aquaman, all the wonderful people that are really working on this con. Questions are open. Anon Pencil. When writing Anon, what are things never, ever, ever to do? My goodness. I think that is subjective from writer to writer. But I think there are some stereotypes that are written about the Anon character that it would be beneficial for me to share. I think that one of the worst things you could do with Anon is to make him an unlikable jerk. If you focus 100% of your efforts on just your character running around, being a big jerk to everyone, and it's not humorous, it's not played off for laughs, it creates this perpetual stereotype where people just see Anon, the character, as this sit-in for the people of 4chan. And I think that's really unfair to Anon authors. I think that if your target audience is to be a general reader, I think it makes sense to make Anon a general, everyday person that for some reason exists within Equestria. And he sure is uncomfortable about it in some ways, but I'm sure that any human that gets put in Equestria is going to find something that they didn't expect. Like, for example, burgers are made out of hay. That's just something that's bound to happen. So with that in mind, I think that there's a lot of really great stories out there in a nonfiction, and it hurts my heart when I hear people say that he's an unlikable jerk, he's a terrible character, just put a name on him, because I think there's so much more to what's being written there than what meets the eye, and I hope folks are going to open up their minds and eyes to that. We got a question from Titanium Dragon. What's your favorite work done in second person? My goodness. So there's quite a few. There is an independent magazine that I read, and I'm not going to out the author by chance, but they wrote this piece of mystical realism where the character, are dating a mystical being like a fairy, and she takes you on these glorious outings, but it has this wistful romance to it where there's an element of realizing that you are being held back, that you're holding each other back in this sort of romantic feeling. There's a really great second person novel that's released that actually puts you in the I'm trying to temper my words very carefully because it's an M-rated work. It puts you in the shoes of someone who went through a very traumatic event, and it's very serious, and it's very gripping, it's very emotionally damaging, and it really makes you think about things in a perspective you may never have thought about before. But it's not an easy question to answer. As far as something on fanfiction, that's my favorite second person work. I would say, nope, that's M-rated. I would say Exchange by Get Me Out of Here. It's an M-rated story. It's not M-rated for the majority of it, and it is a realistic look on if a human tried to start dating Celestia. We'll go to the next question. I spent enough time on that one. N30. This one has two thumbs up. So let's check this out. In second-person fiction, there is a lot of focus on trying to account for everyone or going for a specific audience. But what about writing second person for a specific character while remaining the blank state? Games like Mass Effect and Deus Ex 1 do this really well in video game form, but what about writing? Well, that kind of comes back to the on-rails style. And I say that because it's really easy to think of Mass Effect as a choose-your-own-adventure game, especially with all of the choices that are provided to the character. But that said, do I include Mass Effect 3 in this? This gets awkward. The developers of the Mass Effect games had very specific endings in mind for you. They had a very specific, for the lack of better terms, green, red, or blue ending. Spoilers, sorry. So you are Commander Shepard. You have this ship. You have these crewmates. You meet these people. And at that point, there are choices along the way that you have to make, but what you are given along the way is context. And that's one of the keys to the decisions being put here. When you're writing a long-form second-person story that is on rails, by providing that context and providing all the reasons that you, the reader, have to understand along the way, when you say this is the decision your character makes, usually there's enough context to make that decision understandable, even if the reader isn't 100% comfortable with the answer. At least they might want to see, well, maybe it plays out correctly. And one of the things I find really cool about second person is that every single thing that you decide for the reader in an on-rail story doesn't have to go right. And isn't that true to form? Everyone makes decisions that they're not happy about or make the wrong decisions. But it's how your character and how you write, how they react afterward is what makes them empathetic, what makes them you, so uniquely you. I hope that answers your question. And if you don't, please put in another one. I would love to talk more about that. Nora Dawn is up next and has, I'm thrilled to have all these writing panels since I'm done with my finals. I'm going to get serious about making good on all this advice. Nora, I really hope so. I really hope that your finals go well, and I hope you make serious on all this advice. Hillian Juggalo's up next. Don't go down the walking misanthrope human suck route. Oh, we're talking about Mass Effect 3 now. Somber. I'd argue that Mass Effect isn't second person, it's third person. Shepard is a player avatar controlled by the player. The player dictates who Shepard is, but it's not a blank slate. And I do agree with that, Somber. Especially, it's really easy to see it's a third person perspective because Commander Shepard is distinctly a person. It has the history of Shepard had already gone through military, had already gone through all these pieces, and sure, you got control of this avatar, but it's not you per se. So I do agree with that. It's really difficult when you start looking at video games as examples, because 9 times out of 10, unless you're looking at a first-person perspective game, it's really difficult to discern whether a game is second-person-esque. I'm going to use that phrase. It's very technical. Because even if you're in first-person perspective, you could be Gordon Freeman. You could be the Dragonborn. It's not necessarily second person, but there are cases where there is no characterization to who you're playing. You are you in a haunted house, or you are you chasing off animatronics in a run-down pizza joint. It becomes really difficult to unwind that, but I think it still holds true onto how to discuss player choice and reader choice, because with enough context and decisions, you can ease someone into a very specific decision. Let me jump back into the chat here. It's a necessary weasel. Yeah, Shepard isn't really the audience. He's a military man. I agreed. I just shared that. Isn't Deus Ex might have a better example. JC starts as a blank slate with some heroic ambitions, and most people start out with. Over time, he ends up losing each argument he encounters, which slowly changes him, you, the player, and his perspective. I would agree. Nora, thank you. I have a FOE novel in my head. Can't stop thinking about it. Great. Gordon Freeman, Dragon War Spectre. Second person writing tends to be in the present tense. Is it possible to write in the past tense? Yes. And it is also possible to write second person in the future tense as well. A really great example is actually a story that I read talking in past tense, where it felt like a third person author, a third person in the story is talking to you. As in, do you remember when we went down to the river on a hot summer night and we watched the fireflies by the moonlight? Like, telling you the things that they went through in the past. It's a very common way of tackling second person past tense. In addition, there is second person future tense in which you will take and write a second person perspective out of this. You will encounter problems. It will be difficult. You take a step forward and you take a breath. You prepare yourself a drink because, oh my gosh, Flutter Priest won't be quiet. And you take a deep breath and you will resolve yourself and you will attempt this story. You will put down a few words, and it's difficult, yes, but soon you will find a cadence to it. And over time, you will begin to write a second person story. You'll publish it. Maybe it won't be the thing that you were most proud of in your entire life, but you will still write it, and you will get it done, and you'll post it, and it will feel good. So that's an example. Yeah, Shrink Laureate has a good example right here. That has one. Let's see. Hawthorne Bunny. M30. How about stories that use both second and third person, or all three, using each context of each person to better explain the story from different key moments? I tell you what, I did attempt this. In fact, I have a story on fanfiction called Something You'd Regret, and it has quite a few different times in which, for the you perspective, we focus in on you, the main character, but when we switch to a third person perspective, we investigate Twilight. And the experimentation there was that you are an unreliable narrator. You cannot trust yourself. And it was something really different that I attempted in that story. It's not good. Don't go check it out. Or check it out, sure. I can't stop you. I'm not your real dad. But what I found with experimenting with it is it's really hard to balance the change in perspective. And that could be me struggling as a writer, but finding how to really tackle going from character to character to character to character in a clean, easy to understand way is difficult enough in third person. And adding on top of that a second person perspective adds a whole nother layer of difficulty, especially if you aren't consistent with your your tenses, whether it's happening in the present or whether it's happening in the past or the future. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is a unique challenge, and it's something that's really interesting. I'm not going to say it won't work, but I tell you what, try it out, and I would love to see it. That's one of the things that's really cool about second person perspective writing, is that since it dwarfs, it is so dwarfed in comparison by the number of first person and third person stories. It's really interesting the space that you have to work in to do things that, sure, maybe have been tried before, but people haven't seen it, or one thing or another, it's your ball field. Try it out and see what happens. I know I'd be interested in seeing it. 007 Ben is up next. Do you think Amnesia is a second person story cop out or a legitimate way to build a character? As we're making comparisons to the old games, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic comes to mind. And Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, I am going to say, uses amnesia fairly well as a trope. I'm going to say that amnesia, in general, for writing, is one of the most difficult tropes to pull off correctly because so many other folks have done it well. It's difficult not to copy someone else who has done amnesia better or has done it the same way that you've done it before. It is hands down one of the most difficult writing tropes to ever use. And in general, I suggest staying away from it. In fact, the first story that I ever wrote for PonyFiction that is not up on FimFiction, it is in the sands of time, so to speak, used amnesia. And I had this really wonderful moment when you were going to remember all the things that happened and remembered everything that happened before. But the problem became that at the end of the day, then you're just doing an exposition dump. There are ways of doing amnesia well. It's just very difficult. So to answer your question directly, is second person amnesia a cop-out? It depends on what you do with it. Because if you wake up in Equestria and you have amnesia and you are the main character of the story and it never comes back up again, maybe that's not necessarily a problem. You can deal with that. But all in all, I say stay away from it. Let's stick to something that's a little safer, and you're less likely to write yourself into a hole. I'm looking over that. I think I have time for one last question, unless a panel moderator tells me that I'm wrong. Dum-de-dum-de-dum-dum. All right. Well, in that case, I'm not seeing more questions. What about Feminon? So yes, Feminon is a second-person writing trope where the main person in the story is female. And I tell you what, if you've never written a female character story, it is really difficult, especially if you've never written one before. I would suggest if you wanted to start writing Feminon for the very first time, check out the way that other female protagonists have been written before, or get a friend who is a female to help consult about your main character. But just keep in mind that just because your main character has female parts doesn't necessarily make them a female. You have to write them in a smart way, or maybe they do. I mean, it's difficult to it's difficult areas to talk about, in my opinion, but that's the direction that it is. I'll tell you what, I'm sure I'm just about out of time. I want to thank all of you for your time. I saw that the guest list peaked out at a very high number, and I'm quite excited at that number. But if you want to see other things from me, feel free to go check me out on FimFiction. My username is Flutterpriest. In addition, I also have a podcast called The Barcast that you can check out at www.thebarcast.net. We interview people from all around the fandom. We had the opportunity to interview people like John Delancey, Andrea Libman, and many, many more wonderful folks that you're going to see even at this panel or at this convention. I want to thank everyone for their time and everything that they've done to assist not only me, get here. But also, I want to thank all of you for listening to me ramble for an hour and a half about you. You. um, oh, you guys are so nice. You have gifts on clapping and stuff like that. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, once again. I told them to shut me down. Have a good con, everyone.